When I originally introduced us at the beginning of the day, I said, here are our consortium members, which form the Natural History Consortium, which is the partnership that make up the Natural History Consortium. But we have one extra logo down here at the bottom left. The Economic and Social Research Council funds social science research across the UK. They're not part of the consortium, but they have been kindly supporting the conference for a number of years, which allows us to contact and work with and bring social scientists and other researchers working in similar fields to the conference to share some recent work, some recent findings, some opportunities to get involved in research. And so Peter and Sarah have both kindly agreed to come and share a little bit about the work that they're doing, which I know will be really, really relevant to so many people here in the audience. So we're going to hear from Peter first, and then Sarah, and then we'll have a chance for a bit more discussion and Q&A as well. So I'm going to jump down so I can see properly. But Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Savita, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Kraftl from the University of Birmingham. I'm an academic there in the School of Geography, Earth and Environmental Sciences, but I'm a social scientist by background, and I do research with children and young people about their experiences of particularly outdoor environments and also about environmental education and a whole set of related questions. So I hope that my presentation today will connect really nicely with this strand of discussion we've been having about engaging with children and young people, but also perhaps offer a bit of a twist to that. So the project I'm going to talk about in a moment is called Voices of the Future, Collaborating with Children and Young People to Reimagine Treescapes. So the talk is all about children and trees. But it's part of a much larger programme of a large number of research projects called the Future of UK Treescapes, which is funded by a number of the UK's funding councils, including ESRC. And that programme of research aims to understand the social and environmental benefits of landscapes where trees play a part. And in particular, to think about vulnerabilities around trees and tree landscapes and adaptive capacities. And I'll say a little bit more about the programme and its aims in terms of communication at the very end. What I want to do today, though, is to focus on our project, which is aiming to explore the opportunities and benefits, as well as disbenefits, that treescapes offer children and young people, with the hypothesis that meaningful engagement with treescapes might support education, belonging, and hope. Hope was another term that was raised earlier and that I'll come back to at the end of the talk. This is an interdisciplinary project involving myself as a human geographer, a whole range of social scientists working within anthropology and education, artists and humanities scholars working in English, history, and linguistics, as well as physical scientists, ecologists, physical geographers, and landscape architects. And it starts from the three premises that you can see behind me on the slide. Firstly, that children and young people have important things to tell us what they think about the natural environment, and within that, trees and treescapes. But that secondly, the science of carbon capture and the science of trees and environmental education more generally don't necessarily provide ways to connect that teaching with young people's lived experiences. So we're interested in large part not only on what children can learn about trees from scientists, but what we can learn from them, what they can tell us about their engagements with trees. Also, environmental education it tends to be focused on narrow conceptions of science and skills, compartmentalized into disciplines. In our work, we want to go beyond that, to think about interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary ways to engage children and young people with trees. So this session is all about mobilising and engaging stakeholders and publics in evidence-informed action that might move beyond debate and into solutions. But the slight problem with that, and I'm sure that's not what the intention was here, is that we could assume that we might have a bunch of evidence that might include knowledge produced by academics, which might then inform action in a relatively linear process. But I want to question that a bit to suggest a more complex relationship between evidence, or as in our case, as academics, research and action. So this is not just an argument for action research, but for an approach that values the potentially non-linear, complex, and multiple ways in which knowledge might be produced as evidence and as action in a kind of recursive and iterative process. So I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment through three examples of nominally action, through tree planting with children, through tree measuring, and through hoping with and for trees. But I think it's important to note that our process of working is highly transdisciplinary. So we work as a whole group of academics together. There's a team of 20 and more than 20 of us. We also work with a range of stakeholders, including locally Mersey Forest and Manchester City of Trees. And we work with schools and young people themselves to co-produce knowledge, evidence, and action. So we're working with primary schools, with early years settings, with secondary schools, and also with a group of recently arrived young asylum seekers from countries including Afghanistan, Sudan, and Eritrea, mainly here in the Northwest in Manchester and Bolton. So the focus of my talk is going to be on our approach, but also some of the outcomes of that approach, in which different kinds of research, evidence, and action are combined. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is tree planting, which, especially when done with children, is often seen as this one-off kind of iconic moment that is meant to then live with children for many years and in itself instill an interest and engagement with the environment. Well, I wanted to talk about the kind of interdisciplinary and longer-term way in which we're thinking about tree planting with schools and with young people. We begin in a fairly traditional way with scientists coming into schools like Seymour Park School, which is just 2 miles down the road here in Trafford, where our scientists explore with children what they know about trees, why we might need to plant trees, and the different aspects of different tree species and their requirements. But we are also interested, as I said, in what children and young people know and can tell us in terms of their stories and knowledge about trees. So we have them engage in drawing, in storytelling, and recounting their experiences of playing with and being with trees. We're then lucky enough in several schools to be working on sites that do have space to actually do some tree planting. So Seymour Park had a patch of land next to their school grounds where they were allowed to plant some trees. So we used a variety of techniques, including various artistic techniques, modelling, to work with 3 of the year 3 and 4 classes to produce a series of designs. And there was this iterative process of co-design with our landscape architects and ecologists until we managed to sort of hone all of that stuff into a more formal design you can see there. And then trees eventually were planted on that site by the children and also by members of the local community. But what we're interested in here and also in Bolton, where these images were taken, is the multiple ways in which children acted as agents. They were planting trees, but also at the same time as researchers. So the process of creating new knowledge and forms of experience and engagement didn't stop at this moment where we had the design and planted the trees. So we had the children act as co-researchers with us. They took notes as we were planting the trees. They used iPads to video each other. We've got hours and hours of quite crazy kind of footage that's been captured of the children doing that. We used voice recorders so the children could interview each other. They even got into some kind of more creative ways of thinking about who was doing the research. So these are worms on the right taking field notes in one of the sites. But we're also interested in what it is that actually constitutes tree planting. It's not just about the process of digging and putting trees in the ground. The children really got into the kind of physicality of jumping on the spades to try and dig holes. What they call the tree dance, as they jumped up and down around the trees to firm them in place. And some of them became highly efficient and skilled at planting trees, planting 20 or 30 trees in just an hour and a half. And here in Bolton, we ended up planting over 900 trees through working with 3 classes on the school grounds. But this was also not only about this outcome of having these trees planted, but as we've said, there are new and hopeful forms of learning, knowledges and practices about trees that took place through action, which could be longer term than the simple process of digging, planting and moving on. So a kind of proliferation of activities starting with trees and tree planting, but not confined to it. Secondly, we've been thinking about tree measuring. So another activity that we do in the same schools is to continue to monitor and evaluate and think about how we can care for the trees that have been planted. But clearly the trees that have been planted aren't the size of the one with the trunk you can see in the third image there, they're much smaller. So we're also working on the same site to engage the children in a whole range of ways of measuring trees. And this has led us to write an article which is partly about research methods, but partly about engagement and communication. So what are the many, many ways in which we can measure a tree, or at least think about measuring a tree as a way of prompting conversations about how we engage with trees? So on our list are things like using a laser scanner. So we've been lucky enough to have funding to have a laser scanner which can determine the amount of carbon within an individual tree. Quite differently, children putting their arms around trees and hugging them, because that's actually one of the classic ways in which you would measure a tree, measuring it at chest height. Using tape measures, but then again also using more social science kinds of methods, like interviewing each other, telling stories about the last time they played with or climbed a tree that looks a bit like the one in the school grounds. And then we got into kind of questioning, well, where did the research end? Where did knowledge about trees end and other activities start? So the children were also kind of messing about at times, not paying attention, rolling around on the ground. That was also part of the tree planting and part of the tree measuring, even though it might not routinely be captured. So the question is, how do we embed things like measuring a tree within the things that matter to children and young people and their everyday lives? I think the phrase starting where people are at has been used a lot today, and this is part of what we would mean by that. Thirdly, and finally, there's been some discussion about this today, in particular in relation to often dark, dystopian, despairing, even nihilistic forms of eco-anxiety, particularly that we've come across in some of the secondary schools we've been working in. What forms of hoping remain and might be fostered and maybe prompt further action, both individual, but critically, as lots of people have said today, collectively with children and also with trees? So we've been working through the idea of utopia as method. And here what we mean by utopia as method is not some kind of design for a static, ideal future, but creating spaces of hope within different places, including forested areas, classrooms, playgrounds, and the tree planting spaces. Education as a hopeful practice to enlarge the space of the possible, and what we're currently doing is developing a whole series of resources and practices to engage children in climate action, and specifically around trees. Just one example of that, which comes from the co-research we've been doing with young asylum seekers in Manchester, is this tree of hope. So we have around 20 young people in the group, 5 of whom are leaders, and they've been engaged in a program of sensory ethnography, collective walks, participatory arts, including photography and soundscapes, and visits to woodlands. And what we've done there is try to flip things on their head. Rather than tell those young people why we need to plant trees in the UK and instill UK-centric forms of scientific knowledge about trees into their lives, we've asked where they've come from. We've asked about the knowledges, experiences, and stories they bring about trees. And so the outcome of this from a photography project was this oda tree, which comes from Oromo culture in East African countries, used as a metaphor for the project as a site of dialogue. The oda tree is seen as a space of dialogue, of coming together, of discussion and decision making. And this tree of hope was made up of a range of photographs that the young people had taken of trees in their various activities. So what we want to argue for then is in terms of communication and in terms of engagement, is this moving beyond the kind of content, accessibility and delivery of scientific communication to thinking about new alternatives to dominant conventions that mix forms of action, evidence, and research in this iterative and ongoing longer-term process. This has involved thinking with new types of voice, whether it's the diverse communities we've worked with in the schools in Manchester and Bolton, or these young asylum seekers that open a window onto some of the marginalised knowledges that young people have that are often ignored in forms of policy making and decision making. And for us, this requires a new language, set of resources and activities around children and trees. And we're currently developing from our research a toolkit, an inventory of a whole series of activities, resources for different organisations and so forth. So if you'd be interested in working with us to trial those and explore how they might work in the context of your organisation's work, please do get in touch with us. Finally, just in my last minute, to zoom out a little bit and say something about the programme in which our project is situated, the Future of UK Treescapes programme. This is like our project in its final year, and as part of that, it will have a series of communications aspects to it. A public dialogue that we encourage people to be involved with, a conference, the UK Treescapes 24, which will take place in June next year, and a final programme report that may well be of interest to many of you. The programme will also produce a series of policy and practice notes, a film, and will also be publishing an academic special issue. Oops. Sorry, that wasn't my final slide. The final slide had my contact details on it, but I will finish there. And if anyone would like to know more either about our project or about our programme, please do get in touch. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hello everybody, I'm Sarah West. I'm Director of the Stockholm Environment Institute, which is an environmental research organisation, and we have offices all around the world, and one of which is at the University of York, where I am based, just on the other side of the Pennines. It wasn't raining on the other side of the Pennines, I have to say. I have been designing and running and evaluating citizen science projects for the last 15 years, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that in a minute. I see huge benefits from taking a citizen science approach to research, because it has benefits for both the participants who are taking part in the research itself, and also for wider society. And I'm going to talk about a couple of projects today. One is particularly engaging youth audiences through schools, and then I'm going to finish talking about a funding opportunity that I think some of you might well be interested in. So the project that I'm mainly going to talk about is called SAMI. It stands for Schools Air Quality Monitoring for Health and Education. And you might be thinking, well, how is air quality related to the environmental communication work that I do? Well, so our project is specifically focused on indoor air quality, but the outdoor air quality strongly influences the indoor air quality. And it also links to things like active travel, links to green infrastructure projects and things like that. So, citizen science, why would we do citizen science, and what sort of citizen science are we doing in the SAMI project? So I really see citizen science as a method and a way of engaging people in scientific research. And examples of projects might be, for example, the RSPB's Big Garden Birdwatch, Butterfly Conservation's Big Butterfly Count, and these are projects which I would describe as contributory citizen science projects. So citizen science projects really at their heart have people collecting data. And if you are just collecting data or just getting volunteers to collect data for you as part of your projects, then you're doing a contributory citizen science project. So somebody has decided this is the protocol, I want you to go out and look at birds for 1 hour in your garden on a weekend in January. That would class as a contributory citizen science project. On the other end, if you like, if you see it's a spectrum of projects, you have co-created citizen science projects, and this is where participants are getting involved in every stage of the scientific process. So right from deciding what it is you're going to focus on, helping design the method, trialling methods and things like that, also collecting data, maybe processing that data, analysing the data for your own purposes, or for the researchers, interpreting the data, and then right through to communicating about the findings as well. So an example of a project that I've been involved with, which was a co-creative project, was Parenting Science Gang, which is where parents, mainly mothers, designed and ran studies of interest to them. So we did studies on how hot does my baby get when I'm carrying it in a sling, and what is the nutritional value of breast milk beyond 6 months, for example. So SAMI, the project that I'm mainly going to talk about today, is we would class as a collaborative citizen science project, because schools have been involved in helping us design our methods, refine the methods, doing things like designing the logo, collecting data, analysing the data from their own classrooms, and communicating about that data. The only thing they haven't decided is that we decided we wanted to do a study on air quality in schools, because not that much is known about indoor air quality. So the benefits of participating in SAMI, or the benefits of citizen science approach in the context of SAMI, is that pupils and their teachers gain knowledge and understanding of indoor air quality. And this is really important because children and young people are at a stage where their lungs are still developing. And so actually there's a real risk that poor air quality can impact their lung development. So we see things like rise in asthma, in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and those kind of things. And children are particularly vulnerable to poor air quality because their lungs are developing, but they also tend to be quite exposed to air quality. If you think about the height of a child walking down a street, and you think of where the emissions are coming out from the backs of cars, for example, you know, they're breathing in that poor air quite a lot. And in the classrooms, we have sources of air pollution as well. So, for example, paints and glues. Maybe in a chemistry classroom, you've got things being burnt as well. The idea is that by participating in this project, people gain an understanding of it. They also learn skills, so skills about understanding data, interpreting data. I'll show you some of the graphs later on. And really importantly, about knowledge about what action to take. So if I've got poor air quality in my classroom, or for example, my carbon dioxide levels are rising, they're definitely rising in this room right now. We're all kind of been in the room for quite a long time. We're all sitting here, we're all breathing. If we got up and did exercise, which I should maybe encourage you to do because it got that post-lunch slump. But if you all started moving around, our CO2 levels would rise, and then that makes actually us not be able to concentrate quite so much, and that's a real problem for attainment in schools. So that's a real problem for actually, you know, exam results and things like that. But actually it's something really simple that you can do in your classroom, which is open your windows. So if you see your CO2 levels going up, you can open your window and you can move those CO2 levels back down, people concentrate more, etc. And as well as these benefits for the schools participating in our project, the researchers are getting this really valuable data about what air quality is like in classrooms. And our monitors look at particulate matter, total volatile organic compounds, which is basically all the stuff that you can smell, temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide. So we had 123 schools involved in what we called our co-design and our pioneer stages. So these were schools who were helping us do things like design the logo, recommending that we link to curriculum resources, helping us decide what the web app wanted to look like, which is where people see their data, etc. We've got around 900-ish schools signed up so far, and we're trying to send monitors to 2,000 classrooms across the UK, making this what we think is probably at least Europe's largest schools air quality monitoring project. So this is just to give you a little idea of what it looks like as a school. So when you log into the web app, you can see on the left-hand side, you can see all of your live data. So this is just showing you carbon dioxide levels. This is actually not schools data, this is my data from my monitor in my kitchen at home. And you can see that at about 11 o'clock, my husband started having a meeting. So people came into the kitchen and they all had a meeting. And then at about 11:30, they all sort of left, and it would drop back down again. So on the left, you can see the data views, and you can see on here that there's some arrows so you can scroll through and see the different graphs. And on the right-hand side are the activities. And these activities help pupils to understand what their data means, but also learn those important scientific skills. So for example, we've got this temperature changes throughout the day, and it asks them to look at what's the maximum and the minimum values, so they're understanding things like learning about how to interpret graphs, etc. We've got ones about CO2 levels of an empty classroom, so understanding how CO2 changes when you haven't got anyone in there. And then we've also got quizzes as well in there, which is something that our co-design schools said. Basically, everybody loves quizzes and everybody loves badges. Virtual badges, they absolutely love. I haven't got a picture of the virtual badge page here, but if you look up on the top, you can see it says achievements. And we spent quite a lot of time giving people little virtual Sammy robot badges. So why are we doing this? So as I said, youth are particularly vulnerable to the effects of poor indoor air quality, and there's also this thing about attainment in schools as well as children spending time off school. So we saw this during the COVID pandemic, is that actually there was lots of absenteeism from school, and a real drive to do things like open the windows to ventilate classrooms. You saw those pictures of poor kids standing, sitting there with all their coats and the hats and the scarves on because their windows were open all the time. But actually, there is a trade-off with the energy prices, and we've heard about the cost of living crisis, and schools are really feeling the pinch on this. And so by using our monitors, schools can actually see, well, when do I need to have my windows shut? Because when can I afford to have my windows shut, basically, because actually my carbon dioxide levels are pretty low. So that's telling me it's safe for me to have them shut for a little bit. We can warm the classroom up and we can maybe open it again a little bit later as CO2 levels start to rise. The other thing the other important reason we're doing this citizen science project is that air pollution is really harmful, but it's invisible. You can't see it. You can't see what the damage that this is doing potentially to young people. And so by participating, people get to understand that this is an issue and get this idea of actions that they can do to improve it. So for example, we saw a few months back, there was a big Sahara dust event in the south of England, and actually we saw it in the north too, but it was much more pronounced in the south. And you could detect in our indoor air quality monitors, you could see this little spike in the particulate matter in people's classrooms. And so that's kind of really visibly showing that the outdoor air impacts the indoor air, and that therefore leads us to think things like, okay, well, hang on, what about the traffic spikes that we see each day outside? We see this in our classrooms. We can see that there's this spike of particulate matter. Even when we've got the windows are closed, we can see this spike. Is there anything we can do about that in our school? And we link out to lots of resources, lots of amazing organisations. For example, Global Action Plan, who are campaigning this space, and activities that schools can do, like school streets, for example, to improve the outdoor air quality and indoor. And through taking part in activities, schools can get kind of basically tailored advice about what they need to do. So if they see particular spikes at certain times of day, they can think, well, that's a funny pattern that I see every morning at 7:30. What happens every morning at 7:30? Oh, the cleaner comes in. Okay, what sort of products is the cleaner using? Maybe we should be ventilating while they're cleaning, etc. And I just wanted to show you very quickly a testimonial from one of our co-design schools, who says that the SAMI monitor and app have provided our Year 4 and 5 science group with a wealth of data to interrogate and analyse. The children's enthusiasm has been infectious, and there's tangible excitement at being able to access the data in real time. We are now determined to continue working towards earning all the achievement badges. Like I said, everybody loves a sticker. I just wanted to very briefly show you some data that's coming out from some of our schools. So PM is particulate matter, and 2.5 is micrograms per cubic metre. So these are the really small particles, and when you breathe these in, they can actually go right through into your lungs, and they cross into your bloodstream. So the World Health Organization has this daily mean recommendation of below 15 micrograms per cubic meter, and you see that so the black line is the mean, and the blue line is the standard deviation. So you can see that actually we do have some quite a lot of variation in the particulate matter that we're seeing in classrooms, but it's only exceeding that 15 micrograms on about 5% of the days. So schools who are seeing this, so schools can only see their own data, but schools who are seeing that they're getting these spikes are then supported to take actions to improve their indoor air quality. If you're interested in SAMI, if this has resonated at all, if you have links to schools and you want to get them signed up to participate, then go to sami.org.uk. I don't really understand QR codes, but I think if you maybe scan this, it will take you to that, I hope anyway. And my contact details are there if you want to reach out to me. And I'm really happy to discuss either later in this session or later on if anyone wants to talk about SAMI. I'm going to totally change tack now and just talk about Ecological Citizens, which is another participatory project that I'm involved in, because I think that it might be of interest to some of you. So Ecological Citizens is a network funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, which is one of the sister research councils to ESRC, and they have funded Royal College of Arts, who is the lead organisation, SEI at the University of York and Wrexham University, to build this network of people who are interested in the concept of ecological citizenship. And we heard earlier today that, you know, voting is not enough as a citizenship action. Like, there are other actions that we can take as citizens. And so we're building this network. We've got a LinkedIn group. If you go to our website, again, I think this QR code will take you there. If you go to our website, you'll find our LinkedIn group. But we have a funding call at the moment out, which is trying to catalyse transformations towards sustainability. And we've got kind of various tiers of funding. You can be a community organisation, you can be a business, you can be an NGO. You do have to have a university partner because the university needs to give you the money. But if you want to have a look on our website, all the details are there, and we are running what Savita tells me are very helpful drop-in sessions on Fridays, I believe, Friday afternoons. So if you have any questions about the funding call, then you can go and speak to my lovely colleague, Emily, about it. So that is all I was going to say.
Great. I'm going to hand straight over to Izzy for questions from online.
So we've just got one online question, but we encourage more to come in, which is from Natalie. How can we encourage adult groups who often prefer planning over doing to translate their ideas into action, unlike schools where students are often more obliged to follow through? What strategies can bridge this gap between planning and execution in an adult setting?
Oh, great question, Natalie.
Can I borrow your mic? Is that okay? So I think you've heard about participatory projects with youth today, but there are so many citizen science projects that adults can get involved with. And actually, so I've done research around who participates in citizen science projects, and we find it is actually mainly adults. So it's not children who are being forced to do it at school, although that is a demographic that some citizen science projects try to reach. But there are lots of projects out there that adults can get involved with. And I think by participating in those projects, we've heard today about the importance of community and the importance of doing activities as a community. And we find that that's a really important motivator for people for taking part in citizen science projects. Is maybe they're motivated by wanting to meet new people, or they're motivated to help science or help in their local community. But actually often what keeps them participating in those projects and then leading to action is the kind of the social glue, the community that they meet around those projects. So I think projects that try to bring people together, or, as I was talking to people over lunch around, existing projects that existing community groups who are out there, and then you can kind of give another project to support that community group, are so important for helping support that action, because I think people only make changes and take action when they see others doing it too. So I think providing that space for those conversations to happen is really important.
Just to build on that, and I guess it's implied by what you've just said, Sarah, is that there is a danger. I agree with focusing on different age groups in different settings, where there might be opportunities for intergenerational dialogue, which might also get away from this notion of these different generations, and perhaps even of kind of questions about anger about what previous generations have done, where there might be also opportunities for collaboration, might be kind of points of connection. The other thing is, I would say, maybe it doesn't matter if not all adults are involved in taking action. If that's where their skills lie, we should also make the best use of the professional and other skills that different people have. And if that means being involved more in the planning and then passing that over to others, I don't necessarily see a problem with that.
I'll ask if there's any other questions in the room, or I have one for you both. Slightly different to what you were talking about here. At the beginning of today, we were showing some pie charts of kind of who's in the room here and online. I think we had about 10% academics today and about 20% joining us online. What do you both think is the role of researchers within this space, within the environmental communication sector?
It's a very good question. This is the first time I've been to this conference, and I was saying to Savita, I've really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. I think one of the roles of academics is not necessarily to see ourselves as experts. Certainly in the work that we do, we don't do that. We work in schools with communities and other settings in a way that hopefully facilitates dialogue, creates a space. Someone was talking about creating space, that creates a space for different kinds of action and knowledge construction. So I would hope that part of our role will be there. And I guess thinking about different forms of communication and different media for communication, certainly again, we would have lots to learn from that, because as academics, we're not always necessarily the best communicators. If you look at the way in which we articulate our work through journal articles and so on. But there is perhaps still a value of some of the kind of conceptual ideas that we work with, some of the ways that we try and think in complex ways through ethical considerations and so on. So I think there's a dialogue there about forms of communication.
And one of the things that's come up at Communicate before is that many organizations in the room don't have access to those types of journal articles or the kind of things that you're publishing, or know where to find out about these projects.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And I think as researchers, we have a moral obligation to make our findings accessible. I'm actually really rubbish at writing journal articles because it's very time consuming. And because I feel that sense of obligation to also write other pieces, so whether that's on social media, blogs or policy briefs, etc., like actually trying to find the time to do all of those things is really challenging. I think one of the responsibilities I see as a researcher is trying to support and give voice, not give voice isn't quite the right word, but support and amplify all of the amazing community projects that are going on. And I think this is my third or fourth time at Communicate, and I love it, and because I'm just constantly inspired by all the work that's happening. But I feel there's so much like kind of grassroots community action going on that we never even hear about. And I mean, you guys do a great job of amplifying that, but there's still like so much that we don't hear about. And I feel like there's something around being a kind of as a researcher, having that position of privilege to be able to say, okay, well, actually, there's really fantastic work going on here. Maybe we can, because we are in a position where we have things like ESRC and EPSRC and other funding agencies who will fund our work, to actually maybe use some of the amazing grassroots stuff that's happening on as case studies to amplify that, to maybe, say, oh, well, here's an example of best practice over here. Can we try and upscale that? Is there a way of replicating that elsewhere? And I think we have a role to play in that as researchers, as well as obviously all of the other organisations. I think it's a really tricky, the funding landscape is really, really tricky, really challenging. And, you know, universities is no different for universities. The money is getting tighter. But there is such a lot of interest at the moment in terms of net zero calls, kind of linking the whole net zero stuff to health, and trying to link together all these environmental pieces with the bigger pictures of health and inequality and all of those sorts of things. And the research councils, I think, I don't know if you feel this, Peter, but in the last couple of years have really started trying hard to reach out beyond the university ivory towers and to, you know, say, actually, you know, organisations other than universities are able to get funding. You know, there's NERC have recently had one called Engaged Environments, for example, and they actually had a phase where you had a bursary phase, so you got a little bit of money for the first 6 months to actually pay for people's time to write a funding bid, which, you know, is not what they've been doing previously. So also stuff like they're changing the way that we have to do your curriculum vitae when you submit it. And so there's kind of this narrative CV rather than just be like, here's all my publications. It's more like, actually, how have I contributed to the field? Which means that if you haven't got academic publications, your expertise in your grounded community work that you're doing is much more valued. So I feel there's a shift. I don't know if you feel that too.
Yes, there is, and actually, as part of the project that I described, we have regional partners who have non-academic partners who have funding to work with us on the project. So that's a very real and important possibility. The other thing, just very briefly to say, is the other privilege that we have as academics is international networks and the ability to put together similar kinds of organisations internationally to amplify the kinds of work that are being done. So that's something else, I guess, that we can bring.
And I know we've got lots of really well-connected organisations here in the room, but if anyone does feel like you're not quite sure how to make those researcher connections, let us know. We can help through Communicate or through ESRC, or I'm sure these guys can offer some advice as well. I think we have another question from our online.
Yep, so we've got another online question, which is focused on citizen science. We find strong success in these micro-volunteering citizen science elements, but it's always more difficult to encourage volunteering and participating on a bigger and more time-intensive scale. Do you have any advice on this from your perspectives?
Shall I start? Yeah, this is really challenging. And what we find is that in citizen science projects is kind of like 90-10 rule, which is that 90% of the work is done by 10% of the people. And also that the majority of participants in citizen science projects are white, highly educated, wealthy participants, which is problematic. I think that there's, I don't necessarily see a problem with micro-volunteering. I think, you know, we're all in different stages of our lives with different competing demands on our time. And so for some people, those super volunteers who are going to do 90% of your work, that's completely fine. And I think it's just about matching the roles that you have in your citizen science project to the volunteers that you have who are willing to do those, and making it really clear about what the expectations of the role are. So is this like a thing that I can pick up and I can do 5 minutes every week? Or is this something where I'm going to have to spend 2 days a month in my wellies outside in the rain doing this kind of activity? And being really clear about that and talking to your volunteers when they come in about their aspirations. So, you know, are they wanting this to be a long-term project, or are they, you know, perhaps they're a student, for example, they're only here during term time, and that's completely fine. And I think you find that if you match up the roles that you have in your project to the people that you have to do those people are much more likely to stay. So I don't really see a problem. I do think if you can have, within your project, if you can have sort of various tiers of engagement, so you've got like those micro-volunteering things, and then you've got perhaps some more in-depth things, and then you've got some, you know, really like time-consuming volunteering jobs, then if your volunteers are feeling supported and you understand your volunteers, then they may, if their circumstances permit them to do so, move into some of those other roles. So I think it's all about designing it actually to meet people's needs. Sorry. And give them
And a badge.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, I completely agree with all of that, so I won't repeat any of it, but part of it, I guess, is about why people volunteer in the first place. So I appreciate the point about what happens when we do research or citizen science in schools, where we kind of have a captive audience in many ways. But outside of that, we do research with youth organisations where we have young people who come on board as co-researchers with us and co-design the research. Sometimes we end up, or we build in that we will actually pay them, that we will provide statements for their CVs and so on. But let's not forget, you know, John was talking about these kind of cultures of consumption earlier. Becoming a volunteer is part of that. You know, this compulsion that young people have to volunteer, to have something to put on their CV to make them more competitive. So there's something about kind of asking what kinds of volunteering for what purpose and with what ends.
Okay, brilliant. I think we're just about out of time. Before we thank our speakers, just want to give you a little roadmap till the end of the day, so you know what's coming. We're going to have a little short break now. Our final speaker of the day is Shannon, who is here from Oatly. We've touched a little bit today on the role of corporates and businesses in this space. So that's going to be our final speaker, a chance to speak to Shannon as a mainstream brand about the role that they play. And we've got some great questions lined up. And following that, I will explain how and where to get the free drinks after the conference, be that orange juice or something much stronger. Online audience, I have heard your questions about how to get free online drinks, and that is a creative question we are going to take back to the drawing board. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes. If you can help me thank Shannon and Peter, or sorry, Sarah and Peter.